This week marks the beginning of Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're taking a closer look at a new book from Argentinian-American author Romina Garber. It's her fifth novel. It's called Lobizona. It combines magical realism with the very real-life perils of undocumented immigrants through the book's main character, Manu. So with more on this, we want to bring in Romina Garber. Thank you so much for joining us. The book kind of falls under the category of young adult fiction, but as we know, young adult fiction is this monster of a category that so many people read. You don't have to be a young adult to be really, really interested in it. And the combination of magic with sort of layered over the real life issues that many immigrants face, I think is so clever. So let us talk about the plot. Why did Manu and her family leave Argentina? And what was she looking for when she finds this magical world in Florida?
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great opportunity to be able to talk about this story, which means so much, obviously, to me, inspired by my homeland. So Manu, as far as Manu knows, she and her mom had to leave Argentina because they were in danger from her father's criminal family and activities. And so that's all Manu knows. Of course, she also knows that she has very peculiar eyes, which can be seen on the cover, which is another reason why they have to be in hiding, because her eyes would draw too much attention, and attention breeds scrutiny, which is not something you want when you're undocumented. So when Manu's mom is arrested in an ICE raid, and I promise that's not a spoiler, it's in the back, but basically Manu is left on her own to solve all these questions, to find out why they ran, who her father's family was. And of course, being in Miami, she finds these answers in a magical world in the Everglades that's ripped from Argentine folklore.
So interesting. And we get a sense of some of the magical realism in your book that many Latin American novelists are known for, including one of my favorite, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I loved 100 Years of Solitude. It sort of changed my life when I read it. How did your Argentinian heritage influence this book?
I love that you mentioned 100 Years of Solitude. It really changed me too in a lot of ways when I read it. And of course, if you read the book, you'll find out it impacts Manu as well. For me, it was important to use fantasy, and in particular, Argentine fantasy, because to me, the border between public sentiment and then official policy is so thin, almost as to not exist. And I say this, basing it in Argentine history. I don't know how much you know about La Guerra Sucia, the Dirty War, which was in Argentina. It was a terrible dictatorship that, where dissidents disappeared overnight and children were separated from their families. And to this day, las abuelas de la Plaza de Mayo continue to look for their lost grandchildren. So it's horrible. It's really, really sad. And I thought, especially in the past few years, seeing what's going on at our own border, that it got really, really scary, because my family was left at the very end of La Guerra Sucia, wanting to have more promising, horizon for their children and escape that kind of darkness. And it's really, really scary when we see it happening here. And so I really thought it was important to weave this folklore from Argentina into my warning, because this is very real. Even the concept of Lobizona is based on a real world law in Argentina that you can actually Wikipedia right now, Ley de Padrinazgo Presidencial, which says that the seventh consecutive son or daughter in a family is godparented by the president of Argentina, and their educational expenses are covered. Now, I was fascinated by this law since I was a teen, and I was a little bummed not to be a seventh daughter. But then I started looking into it, and I found out there's a superstition about seven children that says that seven sons will become lobisones, or werewolves, and seven daughters will be brujas, witches. And I thought this was so interesting, because even if this law is not based on that specifically, you don't have to look very far back to see where it influenced it, and that is the truth. The ties to how we envision things in our imagination really get materialized and manifested in our real lives.
So throughout the book, Manu feels as though she doesn't belong to either world, the magical world or the real world. She actually tries to run away from both of them. It's a feeling that I think both Vlad and I can understand because we're both children of immigrants. And I have never wrestled or wanted to run away from any of the worlds that have, sort of created me, but it's been challenging at times to explain to other people how you could be simultaneously many things at once and still be your authentic self. I want to ask you why it was important to highlight this feeling of belonging.
Wow, you put that so lovely. I really felt like you were talking about me, and that is why I wrote this, because it's the book I needed growing up here as an immigrant, coming over to this country, learning English, that feeling of otherness. To this day, I get asked, what do you feel more like? You're a citizen of the United States or like you're a citizen of Argentina? And I'm like, wow, that shows you really don't understand this identity, because the truth is, like, your identities are braided together. We don't get to just pick one thing. Everything we experience is like sedimentary layers that build our foundation and form us, and we cannot separate those things. And I do think that the immigrant heritage is what links all immigrants, regardless of our personal story, because it is that notion of you give up the concept of home. You can never again be one thing. And so you kind of inherit this new world, this world where you exist in the borders and you can kind of observe more what's going on from the outside. And I think that's so interesting, this otherization. And I don't think it just happens, like we said, with immigrants. I think it happens in all aspects of our lives. And if you can allegorize that journey and that experience for others, maybe we can generate more empathy, which at the end of the day is what I think, like we were saying, young adult books in particular, that is our goal at the end of the day, empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of empathy, it's great that you lead this into my next question, because there are many misconceptions that U.S. citizens have about the immigration process in the United States. Beyond empathy, what are you hoping that readers learn from reading Lobizona?
It's a great thing to point out, and I hope readers learn that nobody sets out wanting to take anybody else's place or resources, or nobody is coming to this country with the intent of stealing or taking anything from anyone else. We are all human beings who are pursuing happiness and freedom and security, particularly for our children. And so when people come to this country, they are looking for the same things we look for as citizens. We're looking for opportunities and friendship and safety. And so I think it's really important to kind of realize that immigrants are human. I have a kind of embarrassing story about that. When I was in 6th grade, it was an election year, and our teacher assigned us an essay on whether we thought immigrants were a positive or negative influence in our country. I didn't know that I was an immigrant. I actually started repeating everything that I was hearing from the students in my class who were arguing against immigrants. And I read this essay to my mother at night, having to translate it into Spanish for her, still not realizing any of this. And my mom, when I finished, she looked at me. And I will never forget the way she looked at me, like, you really don't know the first thing about yourself. And she said, Romy, nosotros somos inmigrantes. We are immigrants. And I think the fact that an immigrant could not understand her own identity shows how muddled our education about immigration is, about any kind of marginalization is, and how we really need to be doing better.
Romina Garber, thank you so much. Lobizona is out now and available at all major bookstores.